Welcome back to a live reading of The Effigy of Love, as written by Tony Schablom and read by Juho Hankala. This is Chapter 20, A Boy Named Endrick. Escape. The last word he had ever written in his worn journal, a thing he no longer possessed, was the same word he had been repeating to himself like a mantra for over 10 weeks as he had been sitting and wallowing in thoughts as dark as his bruises and never-ending aches. Indeed, the grey had crashed down on him and tried to drown him, had broken his limbs but never his spirit. No, that he could never do. Endrick would never let the grey close to his heart and soul, no matter how many bones they would break. He was stronger than them all, for within him lived unsullied hope and love. Escape. The word had become synonym with his newfound home, as he had carved it into his mind like a searing scar. In all the gloom and dread that tried to tear him to pieces and sink him like a broken ship, the word was the tether that kept his dream afloat. You see, Endrick had not seen even a glimpse of her for weeks. Not a shimmer of those twin stars twinkling anywhere. Not a single note of the song that was her soul could be heard in the back of his mind or chambers of his heart. Thus he needed to escape. He needed to carve his way out of the grey and reach her. The moon peeked down at the world through a crack in the mass of clouds, its silvery light making Endrick perk up where he sat up at his desk. Is it you? Is it time? His heart started beating faster in anticipation, and he tried to pry answers out of the celestial being, but he remained silent, as it always had. The silence that surrounded Endrick clawed at him from within, adding to the aching pain in his limbs. It felt like yesterday that the grey had snuck up on him through that celestial window in the hills, seized him in its claws, and dragged him back to this prison he had once called home. Since returning from that horrible dungeon, he had been carrying with him something new and unfamiliar. Something that had kept him alive as his father put an end to this endless folly, limb for limb. This feeling might have saved him back then, but now it was an impediment, boiling inside of him and obscuring his dreams. It fought rabidly for its place within him, snarling and mutilating the longing in his heart, molding it forcibly into doubt. Now, months later, the doubt had grown almost larger than his hopes and dreams. But only almost. Escape. Endrick looked at the moon and nodded slowly. A mass of grey clouds covered up the brief light that the pale, waxing crescent had afforded, leaving Endrick alone with a single word as company, echoing in his head like her song had done. Endrick grabbed a tight hold of the word, drew a slow, deep breath, and pushed himself up from his desk. The dull, throbbing pain in his arms and hands fought against his resolve, but the pain would never win. His mind was stronger than any fetters trying to keep him down. Walking up to the window, his aching legs begged him to reconsider, reminding him he was too weak to succeed, but he did not listen. Looking over the night-shrouded forest, he let the burning breath out, and the pain with it. He did not need it, and it was not welcome. It had served its purpose, but now was the time to discard it. For 10 weeks his mind and resolve had been hardened by the constant aches, tempered into an unbending, unrelenting steel that was as sharp as it was tough. Indeed, nothing could hold him back anymore, not even his own limits. And tonight, he was going to put the action into his one-word mantra. Escape. Pacing between the window and the cupboard, he was relieved he could move again without getting fatigued, though he did fear his endurance might not be what it once had been. Since being dragged from the dungeons, he hadn't eaten much, fearing that Verana, his mother, his father, anyone in the castle, had poisoned his food in an attempt to keep him docile. They had not succeeded, and never would, for soon enough he would be gone. He was going to seek her out, find his way into that dream, shut the celestial window behind him, and never look back. Every grey ache and pain within him would slowly die out and be replaced by the colors of her love. Warming up his legs as he paced in his bedchamber, he prayed that they were swift and enduring enough, that all the physical exercises done in secret had borne some fruit. As he prepared himself for the ultimate escape, he felt two storms collide within him. The darker one had no name, though he recognized it as the snarling beast that had saved him down in the dungeon. The other one he recognized as the Inferno, burning hotter and brighter inside of him than ever. Though he had always hated the thing, he had secretly hoped that it would fuse his bones together like melted wax, that it would sear the scorn he held for this place and turn it to ash. It was a seething, ugly anger spawned from other people's cruelty, and though holding on to it felt wrong, it was the only thing he had been left with now that Myrtle was gone. Escape. Endrick repeated the word once more, sensing his mind was drifting away toward even darker shores. That was not his destination. It was headed the other way, toward home, her. "I'll find you, my love," Endrick's heart whispered as he watched the moon struggle behind the clouds to look down upon mankind. "I'll never stop looking for you. No matter what it takes, I'll find you, and we'll be together forever." As if out of spite, the clouds swallowed the last obscure slivers of the moonlight as the minister's bell tolled 12, the first box to tick off the checklist. Then, mere minutes later, those deft, near-silent footsteps he had been haunted by for so many weeks started seeping in through the cracks in the doorframe. The door creaked open, and Verana, that wraith of a woman, entered his chambers, carrying a tray with a silvery cup and a jug of water. Without a glance or a word, she put the tray onto the table in the drawing room, threw more firewood into the hearth, walked right past him by the desk, emptied his pot through the window, and lastly picked up the tray with dirty plates and utensils before leaving. All this time, Endrick watched her closely, reading her face behind that mask that she wore, listening to the way she walked. You see, by having watched her day in and day out, he had learned how the woman worked, what made her tick and what caught her off balance, what she hid underneath that pale mask. And today she was reeking of hatred and arrogant glee. "You glueless little sheep," Endrick mused behind his mask as the doors creaked shut. The maid was utterly clueless to his plans, meaning it was time for the third step. Staring dreamily into the void outside his window, Endrick threw his cloak over his shoulders and fumbled with the clasp. He was astonished by how fast muscles atrophied when not put to use. His legs were shaking from the pacing, and his fingers were almost too stiff for him to be able to dress himself. Luckily, he didn't need nimble fingers nor a strong arm. He wasn't going to swing a sword around nor carry anything that would slow him down. No, all he was going to take with him were the clothes on his back and her in his heart. Endrick pulled up the hood of his cloak and watched himself in the mirror. He had been reduced to but a husk of his former self, grown even paler, grayer from having been confined to his chambers for so long. His cheeks had grown hollow to the point of emaciation from refusing the food and drinks Verana brought him. The lean face made his grey eyes look even larger, a taint that would forever plague him no matter how much he cried. Yet, no matter how bleak everything looked in front of the mirror, the hope within him was still alive, and standing this close to victory he couldn't help but smile. Escape. There was one last thing he needed to do before snuffing out the candle and stealing out of his chambers. Erase the last traces of him having ever existed. You see, while having been confined to his chambers for weeks upon weeks, he had started erasing himself from the grey world, little by little, in an effort to leave this place as devoid of his existence as Myrtle had when the world was robbed of her. He had meticulously scrubbed the colors from all his old canvases and the easel, emptied the cupboard and all the drawers of their contents, torn and burnt all the pages from the remaining journals his father, or rather, Verana, had not yet gotten their hands on. Indeed, he had been so thorough in his desire to erase himself from the memory of everyone in the castle that upon waking this morning he had gone through every crack and gap in his bed to dispose of any stray hairs that littered his sheets. Now, as the final coup de grace of his extinction, he threw the last of his belongings into the hungry fire in the hearth, leaving behind him but a heap of ash and the ghost of a memory before leaving this hell. When it came to himself, though, instead of eradicating this place from his memory, he had methodically learned the routines and habits of everyone that walked the halls in the East Wing. Not a single thing was left to chance this time. While earlier he had had his guesses as to when it had been safe to leave, he now knew exactly when and where who patrolled, what their routines were, what their footsteps sounded like, which eye they favored, quite literally everything. Embers was as alert as a dog on the hunt, but always left 5 minutes after the 12th bell, as if in a hurry, roughly at the same time Verona left Endrick's chambers. Wind had a family outside the castle walls. Thus, he was always absent during the later hours and made up for it by working more diligently, which only meant getting more blood on his hands. Tanner was old as the ramparts upon which he stood guard. The man was nearly deaf due to an accident in his youth, and the reason for his drowsiness were the drugs he took every day to stop the ringing in his ears. His eyesight was excellent, having earned him a reputation as a remarkable archer. Thus, he was stationed upon the ramparts, where the splashing river swallowed all sounds, his sole duty to overlook the dark river. The only enigma when it came to the guards was the captain. He seemingly steered clear of the East Wing in general, as Endrick hadn't heard his heavy footsteps once in the hallways since he was brought back from the dungeon, and the only time he heard Feld's voice was when he was barking orders in the courtyard. While it did mean Endrick was unlikely to run into that cruel demon, it also meant he knew almost nothing about him. What did he do after the bell tolled 12? Where did he live? Did he have a family? Verona, on the other hand, despite her thick, vulgar mask, was now like an open book. He had learned that she favored her left arm, that she shared quarters with the other staff, that it was her muffled footsteps he heard echoing around him constantly, a light, haunting gait, as if she was deliberately walking on the balls of her feet, stalking her prey. Not only did Endrick know almost every little thing about her, he knew the exact time his meals were brought to his chambers, and also how long it took for her to walk from the kitchen to his room, having measured how hot his meals were on arrival. As for the other servants, they were routine as everyone else in the castle, sweeping the hallways not 10 minutes after the first bell, vanishing like ghosts the moment the 12th bell rang each evening. He knew them not by name, and hardly even their faces, which only meant they were never around and thus were no threat to him nor his endeavors. All this meticulous work had been done so that there would be no stone left unturned by the time he opened the door, and left without a trace of having ever existed in the first place. With these minute details in a neat chronological order in his mind, he watched the fire in the hearth gnaw at the last memories of a grey life. Taking one last deep breath, Endrick basked in the heat of the fire that burned away the last traces of him. It radiated through his clothes and body, almost as if entering his whole being, joining the inferno within. As the two ravenous fires danced through his veins, the longing and desperation joined them on the ballroom floor, making Endrick feel as if his whole soul had caught fire and incinerated him from within. The glorious fire burned away the gnawing doubt and scared away the snarling beast. The heat was maddening, making his forehead bead with sweat and his heart beat 1,000 times harder and faster than he had in months. As Endrick let the breath out, he whispered to the boy standing in the mirror, "Escape," and like a shooting star, speeding across the velvet vault above, leaving behind it but a wispy, ephemeral tail, so too did Endrick vanish from the castle for eternity, leaving behind him but a haunting feeling that there once had lived an innocent boy named Endrick in Castle Brightford.